SEC Media Days, day 2 here at the Voice of College Football. We got Will Gunter on the line. If you missed his take on day 1, please catch up with that. You can catch Will at 107.5 The Game. His show is the all-new Early Game. Will, how's it going today?
Doing great. Day 2, and an entertaining day. I think across the landscape of college football, maybe the SEC was not the focal point, and we'll get into that. I know, but certainly just in terms of South Carolina and just in terms of the SEC, which is the preeminent conference, certainly an entertaining day. And listening to some of the people that came across the studio, whether it was Kirby Smart. I was most interested in Josh Heupel. You had Mark Stoops, Lane Kiffin this afternoon. So another great day and another big step forward, right? Another big step forward toward the start of college football season.
Not that I didn't already know this, Will, that I can cut you loose at any time. And, you can take off on college football in any direction. I always know that. But you specifically told me to cut you loose today. That there's something on your mind here, something that you saw that you want to take off on.
Well, interesting day, and let's move aside SEC Media Day and kind of focus on what I thought were the 3 big topics of the day, and one of them is kind of funny, so we'll laugh about that. But the name, image, likeness with Nick Saban, and Nick Saban will be on the podium tomorrow. We'll get him at SEC Media Day, but today he was at a high school conference in the state of Texas, and talking about Bryce Young nearing 7 figures on name, image, likeness, and how a guy who has not started a college game is nearing 7 figures. And I think it tells us to what Greg Sankey spoke of on Monday regarding the evolution of college football and how a guy at Alabama, a guy who's not started a game, is able to near 7 figures and maybe more. I did like how Nick Saban called it ungodly money when he's making $9 million a year. And he's referencing a guy who's almost to $1 million. But it is interesting in the overall landscape of things when we talk about name, image, likeness. So I think that was number 1. Number 2 was currently the SEC's biggest antagonist, I think, in Clemson, and Dabo Swinney, saying he does not like a 12-team playoff. And I think that's fascinating when you talk about a second ACC school, North Carolina, and Mac Brown being the first to come out and vocally say, hey, we don't like this 12-team playoff. We don't want to be a part of that. Obviously, a big story today. And then the third, which is a much funnier story, and we can all laugh about, Mark, is Deion Sanders wanting to be treated like Nick Saban and walking out of SWAC Media Day because he was called Deion 2 times in a row. Mark, I'm not 100% sure how old you are, but Deion Sanders, prime time. He probably should be happy they're not calling him prime time. They're referring him to as Deion, but I thought that was entertaining today on a lower level.
So I gotta get this straight on Deion. Was he happy about this? He wants to be addressed a certain way.
He wants to be treated like Nick Saban. He wants to be called Coach Sanders, and maybe that's what we're supposed to call him. I don't know, the media. This is a thin line we walk as people. I don't consider myself a media member, by the way. I consider myself an entertainer with the way we do our morning show. But the bottom line is apparently he wanted to be called Coach Sanders and not Deion. But I would say that people like us, growing up having watched him, we know him as prime time or Neon Deion or Deion, not Coach Sanders. So he walked out of SWAC Media Day today unhappy with how he was treated by the media.
Well, you know what? I didn't expect to side with Neon Deion Sanders, and since I'm not addressing him directly, I can call him whatever as long as it is his name. But most of these coaches are addressed by the media not as Coach Blank, but as Nick, Josh, Kirby, correct?
Listen, I saw, I obviously was not there. So maybe there was more to it, but currently the story is that, that's how I feel as adults, you address each other on a first name basis. There are times I've addressed people a little bit older than me with a Mr. or Mrs. and they are not particularly pleased with it. So again, All in all, I would love to tell you that the news from the day came from the SEC and that the SEC dominated the media landscape, but clearly that is not the case as we venture down this path.
Well, Dabo's got a certain take on the playoff, obviously, that's very unique to him and two other coaches in the country, basically. I'm talking about Nick Saban and Ryan Day in regards to we're pretty comfortable where we stand. We make this thing almost every year. So it doesn't surprise me in any way, shape, or form that he's okay with the 14 playoff. But in terms of Mac Brown, I would think that he would want this thing.
Yeah, I think you have to address it as a fan of college football, and this is a much broader discussion. And Mark, as you being the voice of college football, I think it's a bigger roundtable that we could have at some point to really break down the college football playoff. But when you talk about what college football has become, we're playing a season right now where basically we can all name 3 out of the 4 teams that are going to be in the college football playoff each and every year. And then we throw some rando team in there, be it Michigan State, Washington. Look, I totally realized Georgia got to the championship game. I realized LSU got there, but or LSU didn't just get there, they won it. But you're throwing a fourth team into the mix each and every year with basically Clemson, Ohio State, Oklahoma, or Alabama. And I realize I just named 4 teams there, but one of those usually gets left out, and then that rando team gets in there. I think we as college football fans deserve more. The way they've got it potentially set up, I really am a fan of it. And you're talking to somebody who initially was not a fan of this, who I thought would water down the regular season. But here's what I see personally: we're getting better non conference matchups in the future because teams are trying to say now, hey, I should strengthen my schedule so that this college football playoff committee will give us consideration after what is now currently the Power Five conference champions. And I think that's a great thing for college football. I get it. Georgia Clemson means something because the loser is immediately behind the 8 ball in this coming season. But you know what? It's going to be a great game. It's going to have meaning even if you had a 12-team playoff, and that's what I really like because you play that strength of schedule. It would be fun regardless. Again, I think that's a roundtable discussion for a whole nother day and a whole nother conversation. But yeah, I totally do not agree with Dabo Swinney. Mac Brown and North Carolina saying that they are not on board with it, I think is ludicrous, given that they've got to fight their way into it. So no, I don't agree with that. And quite frankly, Dabo Swinney is just, to me, is ducking another potentially difficult game that his team may have to play instead of being willing to accept that, you know what, for the betterment of college football, we need more teams in this playoff.
I'm all for expansion. They just screwed up on the number. I won't go into it because I have about 50 different times on this platform and people have heard it. And we will have that discussion, I'm sure, again with both you and during call-in shows and so forth. So I've certainly got my stance on it. Back to SEC Media Days. I'll let you take off on the 4 coaches in whatever order you'd like and whatever you'd like to address.
Well, I was most interested to hear Josh Heupel, really because of South Carolina Shane Beamer and the charisma that Shane Beamer brought toward SEC Media Day, and Josh Heupel. I don't know if you would consider it a controversial hire, obviously coming from Central Florida, where his athletic director came from this past year. I don't know if people would look at it that way. Certainly, to me, I'm 39 years old. The tradition of Tennessee always stands out to me. I grew up in the 90s watching Peyton Manning and Tennessee dominate South Carolina. And I've kind of developed here with a person who understands that Tennessee's not what they were. Is Josh Heupel the guy that can bring them back? And there was a lot of transfers in the offseason. There's a lot of turmoil. There obviously is an NCAA investigation going on. So how did Josh Heupel handle what he had to deal with today and showcase that program? And you know what, really honestly was impressed with him. I think Josh Heupel showed up with energy, with enthusiasm. I'm excited to see Tennessee this year. Joe Milton, Herndon Hooker. I think he's going to go with Joe Milton. Personal opinion there for quarterback. I think there's a relationship from Josh Heupel's time in Orlando at UCF, and Joe Milton is originally from Orlando. But the quarterback situation there is very good. But they've had a lot of transfers. And how do you promote that program right now? So Josh Heupel was number one to me today at SEC Media Day. Kirby Smart, obviously. Georgia is going to be the heavy favorite to win the SEC East this year. Kirby Smart was boring, but I expected that. He was at least entertaining just in terms of talking about his program. But overall, there was nothing there. And then you go to Mark Stoops, who, again, promoted Kentucky. And I'll say this from Mark Stoops. He sold me today. He sold me on something that we don't realize, that we build these programs in our mind to be 10 and 11 win teams each and every year, right? Every program's, but Kentucky has become a bowl bound team each and every year. He's recruited the right players. He's built the right mindset. He's built the right culture. And I heard that today, that after 9 years, and think about this, Mark Stoops is 49-50 overall, I believe, at Kentucky. I could be wrong on that. If I'm wrong,
I think you nailed it.
But he's 49-50. But today, what I heard from him was promoting a program that started off very slowly, but that he's recruited the right guys. He's built the right culture. They have the right mindset. And you know what? I think he is potentially the most underrated football coach in this country, because Kentucky's a tough job. It is a very, very tough job. And give credit to him. And what I heard today from him was, hey, our culture is in place. I know that Kentucky, listening to some of the Feinbaum calls and all that, I know that some of their people are saying, hey, are we a dark horse to win the SEC East? I don't buy that. I don't think they're there. The offense has got to get a lot better. Certainly, they've got to find a quarterback and whatnot. But it was a guy who has built a program. And you know what? We talk so much about building programs to elite levels. I'm talking about it right now with South Carolina and Shane Beamer. Mark Stoops has built Kentucky to be a very solid program that you have to deal with on a year in, year out basis. I was very impressed with him today. And then Lane Kiffin, I'll admit, I thought Lane Kiffin would come in there and make jokes and take a jab at Nick Saban and do what Lane Kiffin thinks, what Lane Kiffin does. But, you know, he was very calm, very reserved. A lot of discussion about Matt Corral, who very well could be an underrated quarterback in this league and maybe nationally. So I didn't take too much away from Lane Kiffin. But overall, you know, just another day in Birmingham to talk about SEC football, to get excited about the upcoming season. I talked about it with you yesterday. We're talking about football. We're talking about Matt Corral and what he could be in 2021. We're talking about Kentucky and what they could be in 2021. We're talking about Tennessee and growing from what they were. And we're talking about Georgia trying to win the SEC East and be a national championship contender. We're not talking about should they or should they not be playing college football right now. And that is awesome. That I love, and I'm thrilled to watch it, and I'll have it on again all day tomorrow.
I thought it was insightful listening to Lane Kiffin field questions about his approach to the game in regards to the analytics and being ahead of the curve, and him basically saying, I was way ahead of the curve a few years ago. Everybody's pretty much caught up. This is information that everybody uses, but diving a little bit deeper just to basically say everybody uses a little bit different. So my book's different than your book, then different than your book. Then you got to implement a little feel into the situation of, okay, the book says this, but it doesn't know how well our goal line offense is. It doesn't know how good their goal line defense is. It doesn't know all these things. So let's use a little wisdom and feel for the game, put it with the analytics, and that's what's successful.
You know, it's funny you mentioned that, because I wasn't going to bring up those comments, because as I heard them, this is the fun part about talking back and forth about college football. That's how you heard him. I heard him as, well, yeah, you had elite talent at Alabama when you were ahead of the game. Mark, you and I could go coach those players, and it would be hard to mess up. And so I was hearing Lane kind of promote himself today and talk about how great he was as far as being ahead of the game. Well, then you got to go back to Florida Atlantic where you don't have all the 5-star recruits. Now you got to come to Mississippi where, yeah, you're trying to rebuild from a few different years of questionable recruiting and sanctions and everything. It's easy to be the head of the game when you've got 5-star quarterbacks and 5-star running backs and your wide receivers are elite, right? Like that, you and I could go do that. So I thought it was interesting. I caught that part today. I just don't know if I called it the same way as you did.
Yeah, I took it as more or less we were looking at those analytics, and not everybody was looking at those analytics a few years ago. And now everybody's pretty much got on board and at least is looking at it.
Well, again, a couple years ago when you were at Alabama, you had elite talent. Florida Atlantic, Mississippi. Yeah, not everybody's dealing with that kind of play. So I did catch that. I laughed at that a little bit today, and I think Lane is. I do think Lane is a very good coach. I think he's a very good offensive coach. I'm fascinated to see what he does with Matt Corral this year, and I liked Corral's comments talking about competing against Bryce Young and JT Daniels growing up a little bit. And I'm interested to see the development of Mississippi this year, especially defensively, where they've got to get so much better. It's great to put up 48, but when you give up 62, it's hard to be excited right now.
And that's one thing I wondered about Lane Kiffin, whether he was going to be one of those coaches that gets criticized for all he cares about is offense, and let's put up a bunch of points and a bunch of yardage and win half the games or go 7-5. And I'm okay with that because if I'm viewed as an offensive guru, it's almost more important than the winning. But he went out on the recruiting trail. Most of his recruiting class, the upper half, was focused on defense. He talked a lot of defense today. He talked about they got to get better. So it seemed like, hey, this is a football coach of the entire football team, entire football operation that wants to win more so than just put up points and yardage.
No, I view Lane Kiffin, and look, all football coaches have an ego, and I think that Lane Kiffin is one of those guys that wants to be viewed as a championship coach. His father obviously has a pedigree as a defensive coordinator in the NFL, and what he was able to build, and we saw him bring his father in at Tennessee. I think it's Southern Cal. I know Monty was at Tennessee, but I can't remember if he went to Southern Cal. But the bottom line is, I view Lane as a guy who wants all those things. Last year was a bad year. There was no doubt about it, and it's fixable. I don't think without a second that Mississippi can't be a good defensive team. I think having the off season to implement what you want to implement, the off season to spend time for your defensive back seven to work on just simple coverages outside of the defensive line of scrimmage. I think that's important, and I expect Mississippi to be better defensively this year. It would be a shock if they're not.
They did lose their best tackler to the team that we talked about before, Jaquez Jones. He goes to Kentucky as a transfer. And one note on Kentucky, because I'm right there with you on Mark Stoops. That's a difficult job in a number of ways you can slice it. Number one, it's one of the few programs in the country where the basketball program supersedes and outshines the football program. Football's king almost everywhere. But if you're at Duke, North Carolina, maybe that's changing, but North Carolina usually, Indiana, they're one of the few places it's known for basketball. Football's an afterthought. They're thinking about basketball in mid-October when everybody else is hyper-focused on football. And most of the SEC's hyper-focused on football even in February and March. So it's a difficult place to win. Also, not being in the deep South with all that talent, they're kind of stuck in this in-between place geographically where if you go to Ohio and Pennsylvania, that's Big Ten country. If you go to the Deep South, well, that's the SEC, and the players are down there. They've had to kind of figure out where they can pluck talent from, and they've done a nice job of going to places like Ohio and Michigan and Pennsylvania to build their roster to supplement the Southern boys. And he's winning. He's doing a nice job there.
No, I've liked Mark Stoops. It's not fancy, and let's be honest. In today's college world of college football, offense is fancy, And Mark Stoops right now is getting it done defensively, and the offensive stunk. That's why they have a new offensive coordinator this year. He's out of the Sean Payton family tree. You've got that guy who's coming in who still wants to run the ball downhill, but is going to have some interesting passing concepts. They've got to find a quarterback. We'll see if they can find one of the guys that they've got to be quarterback. But Kentucky has continued to be a thorn in the side of multiple SEC teams. Now, are they good enough to win the SEC East? No, they're not. Let's be perfectly clear on that. That's Georgia. Florida's still ahead of them. But I heard an interesting question today while watching the SEC Network. What's closer? Florida to Georgia or Kentucky to Florida?
B.
Who you got? You going B?
I got B.
You got B. So you've got to give Mark Stoops a lot of credit. We'll see, if a Big Ten job opens up, Iowa with Kirk Ferentz, who knows how long that'll last? Who knows what will happen at Michigan after this year? Mark Stoops is a very good coach, a very underrated coach. And I think what he's doing at Kentucky and how he's built that program, because as the things you just pointed out, with the recruiting base and having to go fight in Ohio against Ohio State, having to go fight in Pennsylvania against Penn State, having to try and go into the South and compete against those programs. It's a very, very difficult job. And I think I really think the world of Mark Stoops as far as a head football coach and how he builds a program and what he does and how he's built that Kentucky program.
All right, Will, we appreciate you stopping by, breaking down SEC Media Days for us here.
I appreciate it, man. I'm always glad to do it. It's obviously, again, as I mentioned, it's a lot more fun to be discussing what we're excited about as opposed to if there's going to be a season or not.